Hello students, welcome to this video on the interesting short story by H.H.Munro, Saki, The Open Window. Before we start with the synopsis and plot of the story, let's have a look at the characters as to which characters are present in the story which make the flow of the story. So, as we know, The Open Window by Saki is a 1914 short story which was published in the collection Beasts and Super Beasts. And the protagonist of the story is this gentleman, Frampton Nettle, who is actually frightened and scared by the fanciful lies of his new neighbor's niece, Vera. So let's have a look at the important characters. This Frampton Nettle is the main character, the protagonist and viewpoint character of the story. His background, occupation, and age are actually unknown. They are not mentioned in the story. And he has recently moved to the unnamed rural area in which the story is set. So we see in the very beginning of the story that he arrives in a particular area which has a rural setup. It is not urban, and he has just arrived from the city, and he is a bit nervous. He's a bit nervous because he's new to the area. He does not have a very good health, and he is a little shy also. And he has a solitary and a melancholic disposition. Disposition means nature, temperament. So the former characteristic is actually reinforced by his trepidation when he is faced with the prospect of meeting his new neighbors. Now, to meet his new neighbors, he has arrived at their home, and he's also got a letter of introduction which has been written by his sister. Now, he's nervous, he's hesitant, he's reluctant, but then he comes to this neighbor's home where he meets this girl, Vera. So now we also see through his character that he's quite obsessed, he's quite fixated on his own health issues, his medical issues. And this goes on in the story. And in his short conversation with the neighbor, who is Mrs. Sappleton, he tries to steer the conversation time and again in the direction of his health topic, the topic of his health. Now, Mrs. Sappleton, who is actually the neighbor, she finds the topic extremely boring. But he, because he's nervous and he's easily frightened also. So this makes the humor in the story. He believes this girl, Vera's story about the disappearance of Mrs. Sappleton's husband and brothers, and then the whole drama is enacted because of this belief and his fearfulness, which is related to his nerve issues, and we see it come out as a humorous and an ironical situation in the story. The next important character who is plotting the entire humor is this girl, Vera Sappleton. Vera Sappleton is Mrs. Sappleton's niece. She is described as a self-possessed young lady of 15. It is Vera who greets Frampton at the door of the Sappleton home while her aunt is temporarily occupied. So we see in the beginning of the story, when Frampton arrives at Sappleton's house, Mrs. Sappleton is busy somewhere, and this girl, Vera, a girl of 15, attends Frampton in the meantime. And then we also notice that the conversation between Vera and Frampton, which actually makes up most of the part of the story, the first half of the story, also shows the contrast between these two characters. Whereas Frampton is nervous, uncomfortable, self-conscious, on the other hand, we see this young girl Vera. She's bold, she's cunning, she's confident, she's creative, and she's quick. She's quick in framing and plotting and planning. And the highlighted aspect of Vera's character is her penchant for telling tall tales. It happens twice in the story that she takes elements in her environment and quickly frames a story which can easily deceive her listeners, cheat her listeners, and Frampton is one such listener. She is an adept storyteller. She invents tale in a very short and quick order. And she is actually the main hinge of this story, the open window. Then we have the third character, Mrs. Sappleton. She's Vera's aunt. She's an acquaintance of Frampton's sister who has arranged for Frampton to meet Mrs. Sappleton by equipping him with a letter of introduction. Now, Frampton as a person does not know anything about Mrs. Sappleton in advance, except that she is a neighbor. She is one of the acquaintances whom his sister had described as quite nice. So Frampton has no other information about this lady, Mrs. Sappleton, who is going to be his neighbor because he has arrived in that area just now. So these two characters meet in the story, and without any much acquaintance or familiarity, Frampton is caught in a false plot. And Mrs. Sappleton reacts to Frampton in a way that she's bored by his talks, because Frampton is mostly talking about his nerve cure, about his health, and his nervousness is quite visible on his face. So Mrs. Sappleton is actually not interested in his talks. Then we have the character of Frampton's sister. Although she is not actively present in this story, but she is there as an active character in the background. Because 4 years before this story happens, Frampton's sister had lived in this area where Frampton has now arrived. He has recently moved to this area, and here his sister had already lived. So she had stayed at the local rectory, indicating that she's a member of the clergy or has some other relation to the church. So rectory and clergy means that she had associations with the church, local church. Now what is her role is that she has drafted a letter of introduction, given it to her brother so that he finds it comfortable to move in that area and meet his neighbors with that letter of introduction, so that it can be of some help to make new acquaintances once he comes to that area. Then we have the character of Mr. Sappleton. Now, as is visible from the name, Mr. Sappleton is Mrs. Sappleton's husband, who has actually gone hunting for the day. Now, he is just talked about in the initial part of the story, and Frampton is told the story by this girl Vera that Mr. Sappleton was killed while walking through a moor 3 years earlier. But he returns to the house through the open window, frightening Frampton. So now this is a story cooked by Vera that Mr. Sappleton is actually dead, and they had gone through that window for hunting. But when Frampton looks towards the window and sees that Mr. Sappleton is coming back through the window, he is chilled to the bones. He is so scared, he is so frightened that he runs away from that place and cannot believe that Mr. Sappleton is coming back. Then along with Mr. Sappleton, we also have Mrs. Sappleton's brothers, who had gone hunting for the day with Mr. Sappleton. They are being described in the story as being younger than Mrs. Sappleton. One of them, whose name is Ronnie, utters the same remarks on his return from hunting, which, according to Vera, he uttered on his departure. Now, there is a twist, there is a horror, there is a mystery in the story, but the characters are quite simple to be recognized as Mrs. Sappleton, her husband, her brothers, and a dog along with them. So this was a brief introduction of the characters present in the story, The Open Window, while in the next lecture we'll be looking into the plot and overview of the story by Saki. So stay tuned and join me in the next video. Thank you for now.